Okay, well, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for another opportunity that we have to get together and just to come together around your word. And as always, we just ask that you would open our hearts, open our minds, open our understanding, that we may see fresh glimpses of you in your word. And so we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're coming to chapter 33, and Jacob's about to meet his brother after 20 years, and it's kind of a scary prospect. Last week...
Since he screwed him over, right?
Right. He's not exactly anticipating a warm welcome home. No balloons, no party. But anyway, and so last week we had this encounter that he had with God, wrestling all night with him, and seeing God face to face, and yet he survived. He said, I lived, and even so. So, let's look at the first 11 verses of chapter 33, starting on page 150. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. He'd heard that from his servants, but now he sees it. He's still got those 400, that army, with him. So he divided the children among Rachel and Leah and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, and then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, well, who are these with you? And Jacob said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. And then the servants drew near, they and their children, and they bowed down. Leah likewise, and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, oh, what do you mean by all this company that I met? And this had been the day before, when he met all these flocks coming his way. And Jacob said, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Jacob said, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and so Esau took the present.
And the present was
all these flocks.
Okay.
Yeah, what was it? 5 different flocks of different kinds of animals with a little space between each flock.
Gosh.
And
I can't imagine.
Yeah, I know. So it is interesting to see how his long-dreaded meeting with Esau plays out. At first, it looked just as intimidating as ever, because Esau still has these 400 men with him. And seeing that, Jacob quickly divides his family into 3 groups, and then he himself goes out in front to be the first to meet his brother, and perhaps his fate. As he moves toward Esau, Jacob pauses 7 times to bow all the way to the ground. Now, I don't know, we hear the number 7 and we think of all the applications. Yeah. I don't know if he had that in mind or not, but certainly doing it that many times, he's completely humbling himself before his brother. And regardless of what Esau's original intention was for bringing a small army with him, he responds to the actual sight of his brother with a warm welcome and a heartfelt embrace. In fact, he runs to meet him. And Jacob is equally emotional as he compares seeing Esau's face with seeing the face of God. And remember, he had just seen the face of God in the person of this angel, or not angel, but this God assuming that human form the night before. And the comparison, I think, is pretty apt, because No one can see the face of God and live. And yet Jacob survived, and he's thinking, and if I see Esau's face, I'm not going to survive that either, you know. But he had feared that meeting Esau face to face would result in his death. But God had been working in ways Jacob could never even have imagined in order to keep his promise of bringing him safely home. Now, Jacob may have hoped against hope that he would survive the meeting, but I don't think he ever once thought, oh, maybe he'll give me a warm welcome. He would have thought, no way. Why would he?
And his mom is already passed
Dead.
away.
Yeah. We haven't
But
been
she's
told.
the one that kind of did it.
Yeah. But
I mean, he went along
still,
with
he had to carry out the charade.
it. Yeah.
And he was certainly more than willing to do it. Anyway, so then the two brothers engage in a little back and forth over these herds of animals. They're both protesting, I have enough. You know, Esau says, I have enough, I don't need any more, you know. And Jacob is saying, well, I have plenty, I have enough, I can share, you know. So they're going back and forth. But ultimately, Jacob ultimately prevails. And he says he wants to share the blessings he's received from God with his brother. Now this would be a significant thing, because what has his wrong been? He had stolen the blessing from Esau. So now he says, I want to share everything that God has blessed me with you. I want to include you with this. All right, so that brings us to the next part, verses 12 to 20. So Esau said, well, let's journey on our way, and I'll go ahead of you. And Jacob said, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they're driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I'll lead on slowly, at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord and Seir. So Esau said, well, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, well, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. And therefore the name of the place is called Succoth, which I looked up, it means booths.
It means what?
Booths.
Booths. Okay.
So like apparently little shelters,
Okay.
probably for the workers, the shepherds and so on. But anyway. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Paddan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent, and there he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. Okay, so first of all, let's see where this is. If you have your little map, I have kind of an enlarged one. So Esau takes off, and he's heading back down toward Mount Seir, down toward Edom. And Jacob makes a hard right, and first he comes just east of the Jordan River. And it's probably a very lush place, probably lots of foliage near a river, you know, for his animals. So he stays there for a while. And then he crosses the river, and he comes to Shechem, which is just a little bit further on the other side. So he's back in Canaan, but way north of his father's house.
Why does he do that? Why doesn't he just go straight down?
That's a very good question, and I don't know, and I'm sure, and he came to regret it. But
Okay.
yeah. So we'll talk about that. Okay. So Esau continues to be gracious to his brother, offering to lead the way to where they're going, but Jacob says his group can't travel as rapidly as Esau's can, because both his children and his flocks are too fragile to be pushed hard. I thought, remember that first week when they were running away from Laban? I bet they weren't just dawdling around. They were probably pushed pretty hard. Yeah. But anyway, so Esau offers to leave some of his own men with Jacob, Maybe as protection, maybe to help with the work of caring for the animals. Don't know for sure. But Jacob protests that that isn't necessary. He says he'll just travel slowly at the pace of the livestock and the children until I come to you in Seir. But then Jacob, I asked in your homework, why do you think, God renamed him Israel. And usually after God renames a person, you never see their old name again. They're always called that new name, like Abraham and Sarah. As soon as they become Abraham and Sarah, they're always Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah.
But Jacob is almost always still Jacob, even though he has this new name that God gave him. And I said there's no right or wrong answer. We're never told why that is, but I think Jacob is still Jacob. He still has these deceitful tendencies. And despite being given a new name, and despite all that he's seen God do for him, he's still afraid to trust Esau completely, And so he heads off in a completely different direction. Probably just waited long enough for Esau's group to get out of sight so they wouldn't see him before he took off for Canaan. And it's really kind of hard for us to get our heads around that. There are some cultures where lying is just no big deal. It's almost the expected thing. When I lived in Bangladesh, one time a Bangladeshi pastor, who was a very godly man, said, you know what? Bangladeshis just lie. If they're going to get on the bus and go north, they'll tell you they're going south. Just do it. He says, don't believe any Bangladeshi, not even me. It's like, oh, okay. Because we're in our culture,
Lying isn't good.
Yeah, lying is not a thing. But every culture has its cultural sins.
And benefit would it be to lie?
I don't know. But I just know that many people there did, and that was hard to come to terms with, So anyway, Jacob is still Jacob, and he's still not really fully trusting, and so he heads off in a different direction. And first he went to a spot on the east side, a spot that had probably provided plenty of plants for the animals to eat. He built a house, and I don't know what kind of house. Obviously the kind that he didn't care about leaving, because he went on eventually. He stayed there for some time, we're not sure how long, before traveling on. And maybe his animals really did need rest, after being pushed. But anyway, they stayed there a while, then he does cross the Jordan, he does re-enter Canaan, but instead of returning to Bethel, that's what he had told God years ago, I'll come back here, to this place where I first encountered you. And God had said, go back there and go back to your father's house. Well, he didn't. He stopped up north in Shechem, and at first he just pitched his tent there, and then he actually bought the property that his tent was on. So he was planning to stay there. Does that remind you of anybody else? Somebody that was looking for lush pasture land for his animals, and that first pitched his tent toward an evil city called Sodom, and then eventually moved into Sodom and lived to regret it?
Yeah, but I can't think of who.
Lot. Yeah, Abraham's nephew Lot. And Jacob is kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
He's pitching his tent, and then he likes the area, buys the property, tends to stay there for at least a while. And Jacob discovered, as Lot did in his day, that this decision was going to prove very costly to him and his family, especially his daughter. But just this morning, as I was rereading this, I kind of get it fresh in my head, the last verse of the chapter says, there he erected an altar, and he called it El Elohe Israel. Do you remember what El means? It's a name for God. It means the all-powerful one. It's a form of El that's used in Genesis 1 about the Creator, the one that has the power to just speak stuff into existence. That's who you're talking about, the Almighty One, El. And then Elohe, the God the personal God, Israel. Who's Israel? Jacob. He's saying God, the God of me. You know, he's known God as the God of his grandfather Abraham. He's known God as the God of his father. But there comes a time in our lives when God must become the God of me. My God. And he's beginning, Jacob is growing in his understanding of who God is. And it begins there. And that really resonates with me. I was about 12 when that occurred for me. I grew up in a family that was very God-fearing. My parents talked about God all the time. We went to church all the time. We would have little backyard campouts and look up at the stars, and my mom and dad would talk about God making the stars or whatever, you know. But I remember when I was 12 asking them, how do you know? How do you really know that there's a God? It wasn't that I was rebelling. I wanted there to be a God. But how? I mean, how do you know? And so I started praying, God, if you're there, just show me. Show me. And when I was in 7th grade, so that was probably about a year later, a girlfriend came to spend the night with me, and she was talking about the fact that she wanted to be a missionary at some point when she became an adult. And I said, why don't you start with me? And I remember she rolled over, kind of leaned up on her shoulder and just looked at me and says, Edie, I know there's a God. And I can't tell you exactly what happened. All I know is the presence of God filled that room. I have no idea what she said after that. I was just lost in the fact, God is here. I have been praying, if you're here, let me know. And it wasn't like I saw anything. It wasn't like I heard a voice, but I knew he was there. In my presence.
There.
And, well, he came there later. See, I still wasn't a believer. I still wasn't saved, because when you know there's a God, there's a problem. At first, it was wonderful. Yay! You know, I prayed. I've been praying. If you're there, let me know. And he's there, and I know. But God has a will. And God has things that he wants you to do or not do. And there came a time a couple years later when his will and my will were doing this. And I knew he was saying, this is not for you. This is not for you. What's wrong? You know, there's nothing wrong. This is not for you. It'll be all right. You'll see. You'll see. You know, 14-year-old telling the God of the universe, you know.
Right. You know best.
Yeah.
I'm
right.
best.
And then I got so mad because he wouldn't leave me alone. You know? He had to stake a claim on me, you know? And I literally shook my fist in his face one day and said, you get out of my life. I don't want you.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Yeah. See, Jacob is learning. And he'll have times when he builds altars and this God is my God now. He's my God. I've heard those promises. They were made to Abraham. They were made to my dad. But God came and wrestled with me, and he made those same promises to me. You know, he's growing. But there's still times you'll slip back and be Jacob. You know, I was still Edie. I didn't get saved until I was 17. And, yeah. I made a very definite commitment. I had a gospel tract that clearly explained the gospel. The churches we had gone to didn't explain the gospel. That was the problem with them. You know, they told us a lot about God, you know, but not, which was good. You have to lay a foundation, a groundwork. But anyhow, when I was 17, we moved to a new town and started attending, it happened to be a Baptist church, and they very clearly explained the gospel, and I was saved very quickly. I was ready at that time. But anyway, so he's made a bad decision. He's moved close to a very pagan city, and we're going to find out it's a wicked city. And he's put his family in danger unknowingly. And yet he builds an altar and says, this is God who's become my God, the God of Israel. So that brings us to 34. And 34 is another one of those chapters you'd like just to skip over. It is ugly, uglier, and worse. It just goes from bad to worse. So let's just read through it quickly and get it over with, and then we'll go back and talk about it. Okay, verses 1 to 12 first. Now Dinah, who was the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this girl for my wife. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah. But his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry, because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land will be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I'll give. Ask for me as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I'll give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. How romantic. Mm-hmm. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father. Whoops, I guess that's a little bit further than, okay, yeah. Okay, so now we're down at the bottom paragraph on page 1. Chapter 34 is one of those chapters we'd like to just skip over, because it's filled with all these unwise and unholy actions. It begins with Dinah going out all by herself to see the women of the land. Now her curiosity is natural enough. She's a young woman by this time herself. But why on earth did she go out all by herself? This would be like going out in inner city Detroit late at night, all by herself. And why wasn't somebody, especially her mother, aware of what was going on, Now she may have wanted to see the Canaanite women, but unfortunately the prince saw her first. He grabs her and rapes her. And he tries to make amends by offering to marry her. Yet despite this fact that, it says he spoke tenderly to her, he still continues to hold her captive. He doesn't let her go back home. He keeps her in his house, as we will find out, while he and his father negotiated a marriage arrangement with the men in her family. And what they say to Jacob and his sons sounds very impressive. Oh, he loves her so much. Ask me whatever you want. Thousands of dollars. I'll pay for a bride price. But as we have seen so often before, what sounds good on the surface often looks quite different when the real motives are revealed on both sides of this negotiation process. So that brings us to verses 13 to 24. So, the sons of Jacob. Now remember, these guys are strapping young men, most of them are, by this time. They answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. And they said to them, we can't do this thing. We can't let you marry her to give our sister to one who's uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Then we'll give our daughters to you, and we'll take your daughters to ourselves, and we'll dwell with you and become one people. But if you won't listen to us and be circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and we'll be gone. Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem. And the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of the city, saying, "These men are at peace with us." Oh, only they knew. "Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let's take their daughters as wives, and let's give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. But look, will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Because we're just going to intermarry and we get all their stuff, you know? Only let us agree with them and they'll dwell with us." And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem. And every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. That's quite amazing. They were obviously very persuasive. So, first thing we see in this part of the narrative is that Jacob's sons have learned well the ways of their family. They answered Shechem and his father deceitfully. They say that no marriage can ever take place until every male in Shechem is circumcised. Now this, talk about over the top. She's only going to marry one guy, you know. So to ask that every single male, you know. And it may be that they thought the Canaanite men will say, "No way. No. And so then they just take Dinah and they leave. But if they don't, at least two of them had another plan in mind. So then we have young Shechem. He's so captivated with his prospective bride that he's very eager to agree with their requests. And he and his father spoke most persuasively to the men of their town. But notice what the selling point is: their stuff. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts become ours? We're going to be rich. So, they were circumcised, and on the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure, and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. That's how we know that she was still there. They got her back. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. So, two of Dinah's brothers take revenge for what has been done to her. They murder every single male in the city. And in grim irony, they turn the tables on Hamor and Shechem's selling point, and they seize all their livestock and so on for themselves. Jacob is exceedingly displeased with what they have done and points out their actions have put the entire family at risk from everybody that lives in the surrounding area. Because you know, word of a massacre like this is going to get out. And then they are going to be the targets of revenge. And Simeon and Levi retort, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" Well, no, of course not. He shouldn't have done that. But neither should they have committed murder. And the Lord will specifically tell the nation of Israel, the ones who were following Moses as Moses was writing this story and they're hearing it, that vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. It's my job to get vengeance, not yours. Okay, so it's an ugly, ugly, ugly thing that happened. And then we come to 35, and let's look at the first 8 verses there. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel." Remember Bethel? Go to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments, and then let's arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. And as they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities that were around them, so that they didn't pursue the sons of Jacob. And Jacob came to Luz, and that apparently was the previous name of Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. And there he built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. And Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried under an oak beneath Bethel, so he called its name Alan Bakuth. Okay, so a lot in this part. If you look back over chapter 34, the previous chapter, we saw some names of people that did some awful things, but there's one very important name missing, and that's the name of God. Not a single one of those people consulted the Lord before they did what they did. Jacob didn't when he decided to live near Shechem. Dinah didn't before she went out all by herself, to scout things out. Certainly not the pagan prince and his father. Why would they? Didn't even know the Lord. And certainly not Dinah's brothers. Each one did what was right in his or her own eyes and suffered the consequences. But even though they've forgotten God, he hasn't forgotten them. In the midst of the current crisis, God repeats his command to Jacob to go to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. And this is a mild rebuke. Remember me? I'm the one who's kept you safe ever since you left home. Return to me and worship me. And like I said, Jacob is growing. He takes this message to heart in instant obedience. And he does something that maybe he's never done before. He begins to take the leadership in his family. You notice when things have happened, Jacob just keeps quiet. Mm-hmm. His daughter gets raped and he doesn't say anything until the sons come storming home, But he's taking the leadership now. And he tells them to abandon pagan gods and to take active steps to prepare to follow the one true God. He says, this God isn't just the God of one place. He's been the God that's been with me everywhere I have gone and kept me safe. So he's giving a testimony about the God he's following. And maybe you're thinking, what pagan gods? I mean, we knew Rachel stole her father's idols, but, did other people have them? Well, note that even though he didn't know previously that Rachel had stolen her father's household idols, he's certainly become aware since then that there are people in his camp who have idols, such as all those Canaanite women that his sons took from Shechem and brought in. They would have probably brought their little idols with them, But anyhow, Jacob collects all the idols and he hides them by burying them under a big tree. He doesn't want anyone from his group sneaking around trying to recover them. He's going to get rid of them. Leave them there. And then in verses 5 through 8, we see that the God who speaks, the one who says, okay, arise, go to Bethel, do this, he's also the God who acts on behalf of his people. Jacob had rightly feared that his family would be the target of vengeful Canaanites. But a terror from God fell upon those cities so that they didn't pursue. It's just like God put a big wall around them and people were afraid to come after him, and so they moved safely. God is keeping his promise to see that Jacob returns safely home, despite all the foolish and even evil things that he and others in his family have done. And Jacob, maturing in his faith, faithfully keeps his promise to build an altar to the Lord as soon as he returns to Bethel. But this time he expands the name of the place to El Bethel, Okay, got any guesses about what that would mean? Bethel means house of God. So if you say El Bethel, what are you saying? The God of the house of God. You know, as I liked what the Bible Knowledge Commentary said about this seemingly minor change. It isn't the place that's important, but the God of the place and what he's done for Jacob. So he just adds it. Let's focus on the right thing. Make the main thing the main thing here. Okay, and then we come to verse 16. Are you ready for that? Place. Oh, I skipped over something. Oh, no, I didn't. It's a Deborah. Rebecca's nurse died. Now, wait a minute. Rebecca is Jacob's mother. So what is her nurse doing in Jacob's household? Why isn't she still back with Rebecca? So I think what is reasonable was the last thing mentioned in this section is the death of Rebecca's nurse, Deborah. We aren't told when she joined Jacob's household, but what is reasonable to assume is that she would have traveled to Paddan Aram after Jacob's mother died to bring the news, personally, and then she would stay on to serve his family. She would have helped to raise him, Esau. She would have been like a nanny, in the family. And she was a valued member of the extended family, greatly mourned when she herself passed away. The name that Jacob gave the tree she was buried under means the oak of weeping. And the record of her death marks the beginning of the transition to the next generation of Abraham's line. And Moses is about to record the deaths of two other significant people. But I just thought about that being a nanny. Did you guys know Linda Skinner? Linda Skinner? Okay. Phil was active on our praise team, but they moved back to Iowa a few years back. Anyhow, Linda was a nanny years ago. And as the kids grew up, she went to their high school graduations, and it was like she's part of their family. And I think that's how this Deborah would have been. And like I said, she probably helped raise Jacob and Esau. So anyway, she dies. And so we come back to verse 16 now, to the end of the chapter. So they journeyed from Bethel. So they've made it to Bethel, which is still a little north of where his dad is living. So they're heading south. And while they were still some distance from Ephraim, which is another name for Bethlehem, Rachel went into labor, and she had hard labor. And when her labor was at its hardest, the midwife says to her, "Don't fear if you have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Ben-Oni. But his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. While Israel lived in that land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob who were born to him at Paddan Aram. And Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. That's like having three names for the same place.
Yes.
Where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac breathed his last, and he died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of days, and his sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. Okay. So we're on page 3. Before recording the next two deaths, Moses tells us that God appeared once more to Jacob to repeat the promises he had made to Abraham and Isaac before him. Promise of numerous descendants, with the added note that his offspring will include kings, and promise of a land. And how we need to be reminded of the promises of God, especially after we've failed in some way. We need to be reassured. And he's so gracious to do that again and again. Jacob responds with an expanded act of worship. As he had done at the beginning of his journey, when the Lord appeared to him in a dream, he sets up a stone pillar and pours oil on it. But this time he also pours a drink offering, that is wine, something that you would drink. You wouldn't just look oil, but you do drink wine. And he pours that on it in addition to the oil. Pouring out wine in that culture was an offering, was a symbolic gesture that implied, I'm pouring out my life for you. And so this goes beyond worship to service. And God has become his God. And he's saying, and I want my life to count for you. So having reconsecrated himself to the Lord, Jacob resumes his journey home to Beersheba. And on the way, he has the joy of another son being born, mixed with the heartbreak of losing his beloved wife Rachel. With her dying breath, she names her little newborn Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. But Jacob overruled that, gave him the name Benjamin, son of my right hand, a son to be honored. And Warren Wiersbe pointed out that Israel's first king, Saul, was a Benjamite, descendant of Benjamin, and the Apostle Paul was another very famous descendant of Benjamin. So we know at least two descendants from Jacob that were indeed honored, But there's also, I asked you in your homework, who else do you know that was born in Bethlehem? And of course it was Jesus. And that wasn't just, oh, isn't that nice? Because Jesus has a very strong tie with this little guy, Benjamin, in the names that he's given. Isaiah 53:3 tells us that Jesus, the Messiah to be, was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, as he bore the punishment for our sins. If you've read the accounts of the death of Christ in the garden, or if you've watched The Chosen, he's weeping. It's almost like blood is coming out of his pores. He is struggling so much with facing the cross. He was a man of sorrows. But he's also the beloved Son of his Heavenly Father. A couple or three times God said, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him," while Jesus was on earth. And where is Jesus today? Seated at the right hand, the Son of my right hand. So Benjamin kind of wraps up his names, picture the full ministry of Christ, you might say. And then this section of the narrative closes with a statement, and he set up a pillar over Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. That is, when Moses was writing, it was still there. So I got curious thinking about the tombs at Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah are buried, and they are still there to this day. So I Googled it. Is Rachel's pillar still there? And this is what I found in the paragraph beneath the picture. The original pillar that Jacob erected at Rachel's tomb is no longer standing, but a modern square structure with a dome now marks the traditional site of Rachel's tomb. It includes inner chambers used by Jews for prayer. Despite the change in structure, the site continues to be revered as Rachel's tomb, and the tradition of its location has remained consistent across Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faiths for over 3,600 years. That particular part of the land has been under Jewish control, it's been under pagan control, it's been under Muslim control, now it's back in Israel's hands. But nobody has ever questioned that this is the site. So that's just kind of interesting that it's still there. And then the last section has three distinct storylines. The first one transitions from the sorrow surrounding the birth of Jacob's youngest son to the sorrow of a terrible sin committed by his oldest son. Reuben commits incestuous adultery with Bilhah, his father's servant wife. Now, the only comment Moses makes about the sin at this particular point is, and Israel heard about it. And although he apparently said nothing at the time, he never forgot about this great offense, which could be interpreted as a power grab. You know, I'm ready to take over control now. He now has 3 sons who have committed major offenses. And this fact is going to play an important role later on in Genesis. So let's take a moment to list the offenses of these 3 sons along with their birth order. Okay, Reuben, who was he in the birth order? Somewhere you have a little chart.
Oldest.
He's the oldest. He's number 1. So he's number 1, and what was his offense? Incest. You know, adultery with one of his dad's servant wives. How about Simeon? Do you remember which one he is?
Second.
Second. He's number 2. What was his sin? The guys at Shechem, who went in and murdered all those guys?
Yep.
He was 1. And Levi, which one is he? He's number 3. So number 1, 2, and 3 have all done no-nos, you know. So Simeon and Levi are both involved in murder and putting their family at grave risk, but God protected them from it. But nonetheless, you know, they created risk. Okay, so that's one storyline. Got 3 sons with very major offenses. Okay, the second storyline is this repetition of all 12 sons' names, but they're listed in an unusual way. Usually when you find lists of descendants, you know, like Cain's descendants or whoever's, Noah's or whoever, they're given in strict birth order. But that's not the case here. First, there's Leah's 6 sons. Remember, she had 4, and then Rachel saw she wasn't having any kids, so she said, well, take my servant and I'll have kids through her. So then 2 more were born, and then Leah said, okay, well, now take my servant, and 2 more were born. And then Leah herself had 2 more. So by putting her 6, you've got the 4 oldest and 2 of the 4 youngest. I thought, this is kind of interesting. Anyhow, first there's Leah, and then followed by the names of Rachel's 2 sons. So you have the 4 oldest and the 4 youngest. And then at the very end of the list is the names of the 4 sons by his 2 servant wives. And I don't know why that is. I just know whenever I see something that's unusual, it makes my ears perk up, and I want to find out. I've looked in commentaries, nobody's ever said anything about it, so I'm sharing it with you. So if any of you ever happen on it, I would love to know. Is it, you know, is there a significance, or is it just, anyway, I don't know why, but it's fascinating to me. Anyway, and the last storyline is the account of Isaac's death, Jacob's dad, which sounds very familiar. Some of the same phrases are used about his death as the account of Abraham's death. Remember, Abraham was old and full of days, and they say the same thing about Isaac. He lived a long, productive, satisfying life, just as Abraham had. Not only that, but his 2 sons came together to bury and honor him, just as Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury Abraham. So now Jacob and Esau, long estranged, come together to bury their dad. It's kind of interesting there. So that will bring us to the next. We're going to start focusing now on the next generation in the storyline of the Messiah. So you have, we're going to read the next 3 chapters, and I'm having you, if you look at it, I have you highlight, and Judah said to his brothers, and his brothers listened to him, because we're going to see that kind of play out down the line as well. Apparently Judah was kind of persuasive, so I'm just going to make a note of it for now and be watching for it. And next week I will be gone, so we won't have class next week.
Oh, okay.
But we'll be back. Tom and I are taking a little break.
Good.
And, but we'll be back 2 weeks from today.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.